Hi, I'm Jillian and welcome to the show. I offer spiritual growth for the rebel soul, guiding you through the labyrinth of your own ascension path. This show is for the rebel souls that challenge the status quo, those that crave authenticity in every single aspect of their lives, that desire to embrace their uniqueness, follow their passions, connect to their soul and live according to who they truly are, even if that means having the courage to go against the grain or the norms of society. If that's you, my spiritual soul seeker, rebel warrior, then this is the place for you. On this podcast, we speak about everything from spirituality, sexuality, conscious relationships, business, and literally everything in between. So if that's your jam, then stay tuned. And go on, be a rebel and subscribe. You know you want to. Welcome back, my beautiful souls. So today we're gonna talk about one of the most bittersweet and almost like confusing parts of the healing and intuitive path. And that's the moment that your relationships start to feel really heavy and off. You know, when the friendships that you once leaned onto start to feel energetically draining. You know, when you realize that you're always the one that's holding space for everyone else. You know, when you love someone so deeply but feel like a full body hell no when they want to catch up. Or when that guilt and resentment or that obligation start to creep in with your friendships. You know, and if you're an empath, a healer, a light worker, or just someone on their spiritual awakening path in general, then like this moment or multiple moments through your growth stage, like it's almost inevitable for you. And we're going to talk about why this happens, you know, why this is part of your soul's path, and what to do when even the people that you love start to feel really heavy on your system. And then how to navigate that like feeling of guilt that can really accompany all of these shifts and changes that start to happen within your closest relationships. So why do so many empaths, healers, intuitives, you know, people with huge hearts go through this stage where their friendships, their relationships just start to feel one-sided, or even in some cases they can feel like repelling to you, you know, and it can be really confronting because these are the people that you love or have once loved or shared so many times with. And that shift starts to begin when your energy starts to shift, when your energy starts to recalibrate, you know, and the more that you heal, the more that you raise your frequency. You know, the more that you raise your frequency, the less available you actually start to become for, you know, patterns that are imbalanced or, you know, overgiving or any dynamics that are like have a level of emotional codependency. You know, now, because many of us were unconsciously trained to be these emotional anchors from a young age, right? Like you were trained to be this as an empath, as a light worker, as an intuitive, as a healer. You know, maybe you were the peacemaker in your family. Maybe you were praised for being, you know, well-behaved or quiet or mature for your age. You know, maybe you learned early on that love equaled holding space for everyone else. Or maybe you learned that you have to overgive in order to be loved. You know, you have to give in order to get, that love wasn't free for you, you know? So what happens? Well, you start to attract friendships and relationships where you become that go-to person, right? The therapist, the fixer, the emotionally available one, you know, the one who listens but like never really gets asked like, how are you? But, you know, like, really, how are you? You know, and for a while it works. Like you actually take on that role because you feel needed, you feel useful, you feel connected. But this is where it shifts. This is where it changes, right? Like as you start doing your own inner healing work, or as you step into your purpose in your role in a more empowered way, then you realize that that's not sustainable anymore and it's not aligned. You know, maybe you start to realize being the strong one doesn't mean that you're actually supported, right? That being the useful one isn't the same as being loved. And that love without reciprocity feels like self-abandonment, you know? Like, but these are all the things that in a part of your journey once felt good, you know? But actually as you start to develop more, you realize that, you're evolving and you need something more, right? And I guess the hard part is when it actually comes to the people that aren't just surface level friends, right? Because we have different levels of friends, right? And as you go through your own spiritual and healing journey, some people will just fall away because they were surface level friends or maybe party friends, but and those feel easier for you, right? Because you've shifted, you've changed, and it wasn't anything too deep. But where it becomes hard is like the people that you do love, when they start to feel heavy on your nervous system. It could be people who also might be healers or also might be intuitives. Maybe they're going through their own darkness or their own initiations. And then every time you connect, it feels like your energy is being pulled into a fucking vortex. Maybe you feel obliged to have the catch up call, or, you leave catching up with them for tea or coffee or whatever you drink. And you feel tired or like foggy or just spun out, and then here's the part that again can be really confronting, right? And nobody really likes to say out loud, but you actually start feeling repelled by them. Not because you don't love them, like not at all, but because there's a part of you, right? Your soul is just saying like, I don't want to hold their stuff anymore. Like I cannot hold their stuff anymore. And I want to let you know that that's not selfish. It's just discernment, and the more that you heal, the more that you're going to step into this place of discernment. But it's not easy, right? Because sometimes things like guilt come up. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe their life is falling apart. Maybe they do need you. And every part of you that's been trained to abandon your own needs just wants to say, oh, I'll just, I'll meet them and I'll hear them and I'll listen to them and I'll hold them and I'll just one more time. It'll just be one time again, or it'll be okay, or I'll feel okay. But your body is screaming no. Like your soul is saying no. And this is where the choice lives, right? And it can be really, really challenging, right? Because there's so much more that comes up with that. So why is this particular thing part of your path? Because these moments that these come up, right? This particular moment, any other particular moment where you're getting these feelings or you feel this shift, it's a turning point. Like it's a rite of passage on the path of the awakened, the intuitive, the healer, the purpose-led soul, right? It's the moment that your energetic body starts saying, we can't leak anymore, because you're being called into something greater. You're being called into greater service. You're being called into deeper alignment. You're being called into a clearer energetic level of integrity. And you can't hold the weight of your own purpose whilst you're still carrying everyone else's. And I know it's crazy because you're like, well, that's kind of what I do for work and I'm holding my clients. And it's like, well, yes, it's, but then you're like, oh, but then I can't hold my friends. And it can be very, very confusing. But, Spirit's always going to strip away what's not in resonance with your next level. And sometimes that is people. Sometimes that's habits. Sometimes that's identities. Sometimes that's like ways of being. And yes, even other healers can start to feel like weight when, that dynamic is unbalanced. When it's always you that's holding the space and never the other way around. And look, the truth is that some friendships won't survive your healing, not because they were fake, but just because they were maybe built on like an old version of you, that overgiver, that person that felt like if you were the go-to person that you were needed or you were loved. And you've shifted, you've changed from that place. So, what is it that you do when you're actually in that place, right? When this is coming up for you, like, I want you just to acknowledge that this is happening, right? Just notice that a relationship may be no longer aligned, and it doesn't make you unkind. It doesn't make you unspiritual. It doesn't make you cold. It just makes you honest. You can love someone so deeply and not be available to hold their pain anymore. Like, both can be true. And I want you to also notice like that obligation guilt. Guilt is a trauma, right? It's a sign that you were conditioned to prioritize other people over yourself. So when you feel that obligation, when you feel that guilt, when you feel that shame of like letting someone down or whatever it is that comes up for you, just let it be there. Like, let that feeling arise. Just witness it. but just don't let it drive your decisions, because again, you're not here to carry people, even the ones that you love. You're here to walk beside those who also walk beside you. And this is really important, especially if you do this work as a job. If you're a light worker, you're a healer, you're holding space for your clients, right? And this is where it also bleeds into your clients, because you want to be able to attract soul aligned clients that are not like draining you and demanding things of you. You want to be attracting clients that there's a mutual respect for this service that you provide, and them holding responsibility to do their own work, right? It does bleed into them too. So, whilst you may have that very, very clear in your work relationships, but maybe you don't so much in your friend relationships. And this is where the work is, right? And again, it can be really difficult for you to, if you are doing this work professionally, to be like, oh, well, that's not really fair that, I'm holding space for all of my clients who are paying me, who I also love, but I can't really show up for my friends. But it's not even about that, right? It's like, oh, I want you to take that belief out of your head. It's not about that. It's understanding the nature of each dynamic, because each are individual and they have to be equally conducive for you, and that's how you have to look at it. And sometimes, that relationship is gonna just shift, right? It's just gonna move. It might take a pause. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna end, but sometimes just giving that relationship distance is actually the most loving thing that you can do. Sometimes you actually don't need like a big conversation or a confrontation. Sometimes you can just honor the connection whilst no longer making yourself energetically available in the same way. If someone is meant to evolve with you, then they will. And if not, then we just need to send love and release that connection. Because you are not meant to walk alone in this journey. You're here to call in reciprocal, nourishing, soul-aligned support. And I know for many spiritual awakened, I know for many healers, intuitives, the journey can at times be a very, very lonely journey. But it's not meant to be that way all the time. And this is where sometimes, the universe is letting go of the people that aren't fully aligned or aren't fully reciprocal or aren't fully nourishing for you. Because as you create space, you can start calling in those soul-aligned friendships that really see you. The people that ask how you're doing. The connections where there's just a mutual depth, love, support, and presence. Like, you are allowed to be loved. Like, you are allowed to be held. You are supposed to be poured into. And one of the most powerful and sometimes humbling truths of this path, and what can be shown with these relationships, is that all of our relationships are also mirrors, right? On the flip side, these relationships are also mirrors. And sometimes the dynamics that are coming up to the surface, those ones that feel uncomfortable, the ones that feel draining, the ones that feel imbalanced, right? They're also potentially reflecting something deeper back to you. You might notice friends that are going through abandonment or rejection themes, friends who are being let down or ghosted by other people, friends that are struggling with feeling unworthy or invisible, and you've been the one safe place for them. You've been the one that showed up, you've been the one that stayed, you've been the one that's held them through that. And so now, when you feel yourself pulling away, when you feel yourself creating space, when you feel yourself wanting distance, it can feel like you're doing to them what others have done before. And that guilt that I was talking about earlier, that comes up. Because you know their wounds and you see their pain. And part of you probably feels like, oh, well, if I take a step back, then I'm going to be part of reinforcing that story that they already believe. That people always leave, that they're too much, that they're unworthy. But like, this moment, I want you to realize is not just about them, it's about you too. And it's not just about their learning, it's about your healing. Because you're being shown where you're still over functioning out of fear of hurting other people. Where you're suppressing your truth to avoid being like the bad one. Where your own abandonment wound says, well, if I create space, then I'll be unloved too. Like, this is deep soul shit here. And if you're being asked to like embody this new pattern, right, one where you don't betray yourself just to avoid the discomfort in other people, right? And that is love. That is evolution. That's your higher consciousness. You know, and when you find yourself like in these intense kind of relational dynamics, especially if they feel familiar, especially if they feel karmic, especially if they're bringing up certain things in you, then it can be really powerful to open the Akashic Records or explore your own soul contracts with these people. Because, you know, sometimes also what's playing out in this lifetime is just like a layer of a much older story. You know, because in a Akashic Records reading or a soul contract session, like you can start to understand why your soul and theirs chose to meet in this lifetime. You can explore the karmic imprints that are still influencing this dynamic. You know, the past life roles, the wounds, the debts, the vows, the promises, all of these things. And you can start to see if you've actually made any unconscious vows to them in a past lifetime that's still impacting this dynamic. You know, things like I will always save you, or I won't leave you, or, you know, whatever it is. And these can be really common ones. And you can just clear out any of those old dated soul ties, those energetic hooks that are keeping like this relationship stuck in the loop that you're in right now. And then get clarity on, you know, whether that relationship is actually meant to maybe continue in a new evolved way, or, you know, maybe it's time to just in a loving way just complete the dynamic. You know, you learned the things that you were meant to learn from each other. Or maybe it's meant to morph into a completely different shape. Like, understanding that and going in and doing that work is so incredibly empowering, because it just takes out any of like the emotional confusion and creates this like soul level clarity, right? Because you get to make decisions from alignment and not from like a place of guilt, right? Because you get to choose boundaries, you get to choose love, and then you get to release what's like no longer aligned for you. And honoring like any kind of soul bond that was actually just so real and meaningful to you, right? And because, you know, the relationships that are meant to grow with you, they do, right? And the ones that were always meant to karmically complete, like they will start to fall away, you know, in the most loving and peaceful way, right? Either way, whatever's meant to happen with each dynamic, right? You can move forward in like a much lighter, a much more clearer, and a much more anchored way in your own truth, right? Because your path isn't just about becoming a more enlightened or more intuitive version of you. Like, it's really about becoming more discerning, more self-honoring, like in a more like self-loving version of yourself. And sometimes the heaviest parts of that path are relational, right? This is why so much of my work that I do with my clients all focuses around relationships. Like, there's such a huge part, because love runs deep, you know. And when those relationships are tied to like any old trauma or old patterns or old vows, you know, like understanding and kind of like untangling that, like it can really hurt. But you know, you don't owe anyone else your own self-betrayal, right? You don't owe anyone your energy at the expense of yourself. You owe yourself the truth, right? So if this is where you are, like navigating the messy, you know, complicated unraveling of old friendships or support roles, or even just other types of relationships in your life, just know that you're not alone, right? This is part of your soul work, and this is a phase that you will probably be navigating, right? Because this is where this is the space that creates more space for the people who are really meant to walk with you now, this version of you now, and this version that you're still to unfold and become into. So if this resonated, then, you know, share it with someone that you know is in that season too, right? And if you're ready to explore this more deeply, this is what we do in the Path, my private spiritual coaching. You know, we work on so many different facets of your spiritual growth, no matter which initiation, no matter which season, no matter what it is that you want to work on, we can go into it. Or if you want to understand a specific soul contract and clear pattern or some karmic ties, we can open the Akashic Records in in a soul guidance session or a spiritual healing session. You know, I offer one-on-one sessions and mentorship containers to support you in anything that you want to move through at this time. So just check the show notes for all of the information of how we can work together. And I just want you to remember, like, you are not abandoning people. Whenever you're going through any of these types of relationship unfurlings, whenever anything's coming up for you, it's coming up to be cleared. Because you're here to come back to yourself. And I'm sending you so much love, so much support in your journey. I know how challenging these phases can be and how sometimes it feels confusing and lonely, but I just want you to know that you're not alone and that you have support and you are deserving of the right reciprocal dynamics and relationships in your life. So until next time, again, sending you so much love. Take care.